A recent Harvard Business Review research report involved more than 20,000 executives. They identified 6 skills that, when mastered and used in concert, allowed leaders to think strategically and navigate the unknown effectively. The abilities to anticipate, to challenge, to interpret, to decide, to align, and to learn. Each has received attention in the leadership literature, but usually those are looked at individually in isolation, and seldom are they taken in the context of strategy or major decisions or company and career. This article described these 6 skills in detail. I'm going to touch on them because we've talked about adaptive leadership and strategic leadership and believe that those are very powerful together. So someone who's both resolute and flexible can be persistent in the face of challenge or setbacks, but if they're able to react strategically to environmental shifts or technology shifts, you can apply these 6 very powerfully. So anticipating, planning ahead. Most organizations and leaders are poor at detecting threats and opportunities on the periphery or outside of their business. Strategic leaders, in contrast, are constantly alert, vigilant, they're honing their abilities, they're going through training, and they are anticipating by scanning the environment for signals of change. So talking to your customers as a leader, talking to your suppliers and other partners to understand what their challenges are, conducting market research and business simulations can help to understand industry and customer perspectives. So using scenario planning to imagine various futures and to prepare for the unexpected. One thing I like to do is attend conferences or industry events, not just in my own industry, but other industries, to give you ideas of what other functions or what other markets are doing. Challenging. Strategic thinkers are challengers. They always ask questions of the status quo. They challenge their own assumptions and others. They encourage divergent points of view. And then only after careful reflection and input and examination of a problem do strategic leaders turn those lenses into decisive action. Now, this requires patience and courage and an open mind. It's not the mindset of a manager. It's the mindset of a strategic leader, one who focuses on root causes of a problem rather than just the symptoms. One thing that's very effective is the 5 whys. Sakichi Toyoda's founder, utilized these. I encourage you to take some time to look at 5 whys. Encourage debating by holding safe zone meetings where open dialogue and conflict are expected and even welcomed. Include that heretic or naysayers in the decision process to surface challenges early and often. Interpret. A strategic leader will also interpret. Leaders who challenge in the right way invariably elicit complex and conflicting information that they have to go through, much data that they have to digest and sort through. Instead of just reflexively or emotionally seeing or hearing things the way you want to hear them or how you would expect to hear them, a strategic leader should synthesize all the inputs that you have. Look at all the data and get lots of it. You'll need to recognize patterns and push through ambiguity and seek new insights. Force yourself to zoom in on the details onto the dance floor while getting onto the balcony and seeing the big picture. Actively look for missing information and evidence that will not agree with your hypothesis. Dig in to areas that go against your hypothesis. That's hard to do. Decide. Oftentimes leaders will have decision paralysis. They'll have all that data, but they're not willing to take the plunge and make a decision. In uncertain times, and even in certain times, decision makers have to make the tough calls with incomplete information, and often they must do so quickly. Having that data paralysis analysis is not a good thing as a leader. Strategic thinkers insist on multiple options at the beginning and at the outset, and don't get prematurely locked into a simplistic go or no-go choice. They don't shoot from the hip, but they follow a disciplined process that balances rigor with speed, considering trade-offs involved, taking both short and long-term goals into account. In the end, strategic leaders must have the courage and convictions informed by that robust decision-making process into making decisions. It's important as a strategic leader to reframe those binary questions into asking your team, what other options do we have? Dividing big decisions into smaller pieces to understand important component parts. Communication is important, and strategic leaders don't often do that. Letting people know where you stand in the decision-making process is important. Are you still seeking ideas or debate, or are you moving towards closure and choice? Have you narrowed the options down? Determining who needs to be directly involved in the decisions and who can influence the success and implementations of those decisions should be involved. Consider pilots or a narrow implementation instead of a broad implementation just to test your hypothesis and decisions. Instead of big bets, maybe place smaller bets and make staged commitments instead of long-term big investments. Alignment. Strategic leaders must be adept at finding common ground and achieving buy-in among stakeholders. Stakeholders oftentimes have disparate views and have their own agendas. The success will be communicating with them, building trust, having frequent engagement, and communicating early and often with others outside of your narrow area of function or comfortable debate. Communicating early and often to combat the two most common complaints in an organization. What are the two most common complaints in an organization? No one ever asked me, and no one ever told me. Identify key communication areas and strategies to go address those two complaints. Identifying key internal and external stakeholders, mapping their positions where there might be misalignment, looking for hidden agendas, looking for coalitions to build, using structured and facilitated conversations to expose areas of misunderstanding or resistance. Reaching out to resistors early is important. That way you can directly understand their issues, and they may have valid complaints or concerns that you can address. Recognize and reward colleagues who support team alignment. And then lastly, in this study, the last step in thinking strategically is learn. Strategic leaders are the focal point for organizational learning. They promote a culture of inquiry. They search for lessons learned in both successful and unsuccessful outcomes. They don't just study the failures, but then they set up training and learning to go address those. And they do that in an open, constructive way to find and uncover hidden lessons. One thing I've found to be successful is instituting after-action reports. Minutes, document lessons learned, documenting the who, what, and when as you move forward in the next phases of strategy. I hope this has been helpful. Strategic leadership is very, very important. The last couple things on strategic leadership are to make sure you have the right partnerships established and the right agreements brokered, and putting those down in writing, documenting roles and responsibilities for what those agreements are. And then monitoring and measuring your environment, monitoring that strategy against your execution plan on a regular basis. And then lastly, having a shared vision and mission, which we'll talk about here shortly, is extremely important and one of the most important things a strategic leader can do.